Hello again, everybody. Welcome to another episode of BitNote. We'll be playing some great video game music from a couple of cool indie-dependent developed games. So, have a listen and hope you enjoy. Okay, so to start things off, I'm going to play some really nice sort of electronic transy kind of track from a game that was released independently and has a nice mix of both puzzle and action in it. I shall now play Infiltrate from A Virus Named Tom. And what you just heard there was Infiltration. It is by Ian Hicks, and it is from the video game A Virus Named Tom by Misfits Attic. So A Virus Named Tom is actually a pretty funny little game. Essentially, you play a virus, as the title said. Indeed, you are the virus that was invented by a mad scientist who is seeking revenge. The whole thing and story of the game is played out through a nice bunch of animations, but essentially the scientist does very well and creates all these great inventions that create the city of tomorrow, a futuristic utopian society. But then he gets screwed over by corporate interests who basically want it all to themselves and they shunt him out, and he gets angry, so he decides to take revenge by inventing a virus that will go around, attack all his great inventions, cause them to malfunction in the most spectacularly disastrous ways possible, and essentially destroy the entire city that the corporation is now controlling, and cause the corporation to hit along on the basis that if no one can play with this ball, then I'm just going to take my ball and go home with it. It obviously isn't the most, moral reason for adventuring into this, but like I said, with video games we get to embark not always being on the positive side, and sometimes just do things that are utterly crazy. The actual game basically involves you infecting a computer system, and this is kind of where the game has kind of a bit of a split mind to it. On one end, it's a bit of a puzzle game. On the other hand, it's more of an action game. You move your virus around this grid, and you have to rotate the blocks, and you have to do it so they all hook up to each other so that the virus is able to get to every single part of the network. But at the same time, you've got these antivirus drone bots that move back and forth, and if your virus hits them bots, then you get destroyed and things get a little screwy. So it's kind of tricky actually when I was playing it, because I was like trying to work out all the puzzle things. I got to move this there and that there, and then suddenly this fire spot comes along and I try to move it out of the way and go, damn it! You know, it's like if you're working on a maths assignment and suddenly every so often someone kicks a football towards your head. So you jump out and have to, like, you know, header it or get out of the way or something, and then suddenly get back to the maths and try to go back and forth between the two. It's very tricky and all, but most of the time that's only in the later stages. For most of the game, you know, the levels either focus more on the puzzle solving or more on the action side, and you make your way through the levels, more elements gets introduced, and you destroy more and more of this great utopian society, often with rather horrific consequences. You know, when you completely sabotage the teleporter, it shows an animation of what happens as a result, and really it wasn't the nicest, I have to say. Yeah. Alright, I'll leave you with Badvoca, another one of Ian Hicks' tracks, and then we'll move on to the next game. And that, as I said, was Badvoca by Ian Hicks from A Virus Named Tom by Misfits Attic. So we move on to our next game now, and it's a very special game, I think, because it touched me and it got me involved in a way I hadn't been in a video game for a while now. The name is called Papo Yo, and it is by Minority. And before I start, why don't I just play a bit of music from it? I mean, before I begin, this was honestly a bit of a breath of fresh air. Sometimes you play a lot of games and they all seem to have similar themes and stuff, and maybe it's an illusion, but sometimes what you really want in games is just it to express something new, to express something that was very personal to the person creating it, and really meant something to them, so that you can actually feel you're getting someone speaking their mind as they truly are, and not just creating some construct that they hope will appease people and make people happy. And I'm a huge believer in personal expression and just letting people say what their truth is. But I also want good games, so if it's a good game and it's a brilliant personal expression, everybody wins. I'll give you A Strange New World, which is the first track of this game, and just to set the scene, and I'll follow up a little more about what the game is about from there. Have a listen. And what you have just heard was A Strange New World. It was composed by Brian D'Oliveira, and it is from Papo Yo, which is by Minority. The title is actually Papa Ampersand Yo, but apparently it translates to Father and Me, and in its original language it's Papa Yo. So Papa Yo, or Father and Me, or Papa Ampersand Yo, however you say it. Anyway, the game starts essentially as you see a schoolboy in full uniform hiding in a closet while apparently a monster is outside, kind of threatening. You suddenly see this chalk thing on the opposite side of the closet, which suddenly shimmers, and you jump through it and suddenly find yourself in a magical world. And that's kind of the trip you go on, going through this great world, going on this great adventure, this great journey. And that's essentially how the game starts off, and is a lot about what the game is about. You're a kid in a great big fantasy world, and it's like what it's styled off of is very interesting as well. It's basically based off of favelas, which are basically those shanty towns. Now, you probably mentally associate them a lot with Brazil. Essentially, you see all these buildings and buildings on top of buildings, everything pushed together, and they're all stacked and all underground and everything as well. Now, I believe that it's actually based sort of on the Colombian favelas rather than the Brazilian ones, but it's still the whole South American thing, and essentially it's all not just crowded or with people, but it's like recreated as a kid's imagination, where all the buildings seem completely like normal and everything, but they're such varied terrain, and they're stacked on top of them, and they precipice, and then they tilt and everything. And as you start going on, you realize that you're not just like going along in a world that's, that's there. You're actually manipulating the world in all sorts of ways. You suddenly push something and like a bridge opens up, or you actually pull forward the whole face of a building and then it comes out like a staircase. Or then in some cases, some of the buildings start stacking on top of each other, which is fun, or you start moving them around. And in other fun things, you get on top of one of these like buildings area, and suddenly it gets up in its own legs and starts walking along. So I think it taps into what is a lot of good about children's fantasy fiction, in that it's based a lot on a very real world circumstances, and you can really, really feel that. But at the same time, the kid is completely taking their own spin on it. They're doing their own things. They're manipulating in the way they want to do it. They're turning this real world into kind of like a whole playground, a fun thing, where all these crazy, fun and surreal things can happen. And then they're just going with it. It reminded me a little of this French cartoon I watched when I was a kid called Clementine, which kind of was based in the early part of the 1900s, and there were like big old style airplanes and everything. But as it went on, there was a lot of fantasy and weirds and surreal elements come, and you could see how it's kind of like based a bit on reality, but it's the own thing. So with Papo Yo, you're playing as this kid. The kid is, by the way, called Kiko, and he's going around through these really vibrant and brilliant environments. And of course, it's really, really cool. But as it goes on, as you can tell, it's kind of based on reality, and there's kind of one other element of Kiko's reality that kind of finds its own way into the fantasy world, and I'll get to that bit next. For now, let's try another great track from the game called A New Hope. Have a listen. And that was A New Hope by Brian D'Oliveira from Papo Yo. it's very nice music, isn't it? It actually is a little like Portal 2 in that, I know, completely different genre, in that it's like Portal 2. It's the music is constructed from a lot of different elements, and you interact with the music as you progress through the game and do little elements, and it causes more things to be added to the whole soundtrack store. So it becomes very ambient. So a lot of the time you're not even really noticing that the music is there in the background. That's a credit to Brian DeLira and everyone developing at Minority. So, as I was saying, you eventually, as you play through the game, you interact with all these chalk drawings, and you pull levers, and the environment gets manipulated, and sometimes buildings fall down, and you climb up, and all this, and you interact with this girl who seems to have a weird relationship with you. And as you go through the game, you come across this monster. Now, it seems friendly at first, and everything seems to go well, and you're like bouncing off his stomach, and you're moving along with him. But then the monster suddenly manages to find a frog and eats the frog, and then it bad stuff happens, very bad. It was very frightening. I mean, look, skipping to after all the bad stuff happens, you manage to calm down the monster, and you try to get him to calm down, but you realize that this state of affairs cannot continue. I mean, you do not want it to continue, seriously. I mean, yeah. It's a bad, very, very bad thing. Anyway, the point is, it becomes very clear that you want to now cure the monster, and that becomes your quest. You've got to cure the monster so stuff like that will never ever happen again, and that everyone will be happy, and that the monster will be okay. And so far on begins your quest. The girl who you spoke up with gives you guidance, and you go on this journey, and you have to go through more in a strange and surreal landscape, and I mean, at one point, and definitely non-Euclidean geometry, which I like just to throw that in there. And you interact with all these chalk drawings that pull and twist and turn, and a lot of times things will get up on the legs and move, and you've got to push. And essentially, you just keep going through it, keep jumping, keep pushing, keep performing ceremonies. And you've also got a nice little toy robot who flies around and gives you a boost and chats with you and everything. So everything's cool in that regard. As it goes on, I think you might have realized that there's a bit of symbolism going on here. I mean, it's obvious from the start, and, you know, especially a bit of text comes up before the game, that essentially there's a bit of a metaphor going on in here. That the monster is kind of representing Kiko's father. It's not, you know, it's kind of obvious, though it's not too hammered into your face, not much. And it's also clear that, you know, whatever the gigantic fire-fueled rage that the monster goes into whenever it eats frog is obviously somewhat inspired by some addiction or some terrible thing that the father goes through. But of course, Kiko is more doing his imaginary world thing, so it gets a different metaphor for it, and he's trying to deal with this monster on its own terms and going on this heroic quest. And that's one of the beautiful things about the game. I mean, a lot of media I've noticed were ending up focusing on, Papo Yo is all about, you know, this terrible child abuse and stuff. And I mean, you know, a lot of true gamers are really annoyed that a lot of people interpret gaming as being pointless or useless. So anytime a game even remotely touches on a serious topic, they block to it and emphasize that. But I think that's disappointing, because it also off-puts what the game is about, which is that this is Kiko's game. He's not letting himself be defined by his father or what's going on. He is defining his own world, and his father is naturally playing a part, but a different role in what that world is. So it's a lot about a child's imagination or a child's journey in order to set himself out and put things in context. And that leads us to the game's ending, which I am definitely not going to spoil. But I will say this, though. It is an ending, and I like that. The game, as well as trying to deal with in the media, gaming media, as well as also been trying to say, this is a serious topic. A lot of others are trying to say, this is an arty game. And I've talked with Sean about how I don't like arty games, but the real reason why I don't like a lot of arty games is that they're not really about anything. They throw a lot of surreal, crazy stuff. And one thing I realized about most art games is they don't have proper endings. Limbo had a beginning I didn't understand, so it had an ending I didn't understand. Do not get me started on Braid, which had the most craziest ending as well, that people liked a bit towards the end of the game, but not the ending itself didn't make any sense. And I could go on. But Papo Yo is about something, and its ending is truly a resolution about the journey that the child goes through and how he puts things in perspective. And no way in heck am I going to spoil this. In fact, this last song I'm going to play from the game actually has a extra bit in parentheses that might actually spoil what the ending is slightly, so I simply won't tell you what that extra bit is. I think it's beautiful. I think it's a perfect end, and it really shows you how that there's someone out there is just trying to actually tell a story, to try something about their own experiences. And because it's based on real life in a lot of ways, however fantastical it is, you know that the person developing it and the team developing it is going to take it seriously and go with it. So I leave you with the final track of the game, Liberation. I would highly recommend you play Papo Yo. It is on Windows, Mac and Linux, and it is also, as it was originally supported by Sony, it's also for download on the PlayStation Network or PlayStation Store, whatever they saw it, so you can play it on the PlayStation 3. This has been David Collins with BitNote, leaving you with Liberation by Brian Delivier from Papo Yo by Minority. Thank you for listening, and hope you enjoy.